The slap echoed through the boardroom like a gunshot.
I said, black people like you don't belong here.
For a moment, nobody breathed. 12 executives froze where they stood. Phones hovered midair. A few gasped. Some covered their mouths. Others just stared, stunned, unsure if what they just witnessed was even real. Ariana Brooks didn't move. Her cheeks stung. Her eyes watered. But she stayed standing. Tall. Calm. Unshaken. Across from her, Daniel Huxley, senior manager, office tyrant and self-appointed ruler of the 32nd floor, glared at her like she was dirt beneath his expensive shoes. I said people like you don't belong in here, he shouted, chest heaving, face red with rage. His voice bounced off the glass walls. Phones were still recording. Everyone in the room knew this wasn't just wrong. This was career-ending. This was catastrophic. But Daniel didn't see it. He didn't feel the shift in the room. He didn't notice the horror on the executives' faces. He was too locked into his own anger, too blinded by arrogance, too full of himself to realize he wasn't yelling at some random junior staffer. He was yelling at the one person in the entire corporation he should have been terrified of. Ariana finally inhaled, the air sharp in her throat, but she didn't raise her voice. She didn't step back. She didn't retreat. She simply fixed her gaze on him with a look so steady, so collected, it rattled him in a way he couldn't explain. But instead of backing down, Daniel doubled down. You think you can just walk in here? In a boardroom meeting? Are you insane? He snapped, stepping closer to her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his breath. You people always think rules don't apply to you. A few whispered, "Oh my God." Others stopped recording, hands shaking too badly to hold their phones steady. Only 2 people kept filming. They knew something historic was happening. Ariana's cheek throbbed from the slap, but her voice stayed level. I was invited, she said. Daniel laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. Invited? By who? The janitorial department. He turned to the room as if expecting applause. This is a meeting for decision makers. Executives. Not for people who. He stopped. Not because he wanted to, but because the doors behind them swung open with a force that shook the room. Footsteps followed, heavy, authoritative, controlled. The kind of footsteps that made the back of every executive's neck stiffen. The chairman of the board entered first. Behind him came 2 directors, both stiff-faced and tense. A security officer walked in last, shutting the door quietly behind him. Daniel's smirk died instantly. Sir, I was just addressing. Don't speak, the chairman said without looking at him. Daniel's mouth shut. The chairman turned to Ariana with a respectful nod that made every executive exchange panicked whispers. Ms. Brooks, he said with calm authority. We're sorry for the delay. Daniel blinked. Ms. Brooks. He felt something shift inside him. Something cold and nauseating. He watched as the chairman continued. Gentlemen, ladies, please stand. Every executive stood. All except Daniel, whose knees felt glued to the floor. The chairman stepped beside Ariana, facing the room. For those who don't yet know, he said with a measured breath, allow me to formally introduce Ms. Ariana Brooks. Ariana didn't speak. She didn't smile. She didn't even nod. She stood there, still recovering from the sting on her cheek. The chairman went on. As of last week, Ms. Brooks became the majority shareholder of this corporation. She now owns 62% of the company through Brooks Capital Holdings. A gasp erupted through the room. Someone nearly dropped their phone. Daniel stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the conference table with his hip. The chairman continued, effective immediately, she is the primary authority over all corporate decisions and the controlling power of this entire organization. Silence. The kind of silence that presses down on your lungs. Ariana finally turned her eyes from Daniel to the entire room. Her voice was soft but sharp enough to split steel. Before we begin the meeting, she said, there's something I need to address. She stepped toward Daniel, but not aggressively, slowly, purposefully. Like a judge walking toward a guilty man. Daniel swallowed hard, the sound embarrassingly loud. Ariana's tone never rose. She didn't need to shout. When I walked in this morning, I didn't announce who I was, she said. I didn't ask for special treatment. I didn't come with a security team or cameras. I entered this building the same way thousands of employees do every day. She paused. But now I know how someone like you treats people like me. Daniel opened his mouth to speak. Maybe to apologize, maybe to lie, maybe to justify himself, but no words came out. Ariana tilted her head slightly, studying him with a calm that felt like a verdict. You didn't bother to ask my name, she said. You didn't bother to ask my position. You didn't ask why I was here. You looked at my skin, my gender, my age, and decided I didn't belong. Her words hit the room like thunder. One executive quietly wiped a tear. Another lowered her head in shame. A few of the men stared at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. Ariana continued. You didn't just disrespect an employee. You assaulted one. And you did it proudly, as if it were something you had a right to do. Daniel's breath trembled. I didn't know. That's the problem, she cut in gently. You never imagine that the person you're humiliating could be someone who holds power. Because you assume people like me don't have any. Daniel flinched. Ariana nodded toward the security officer near the door. Escort him out of this building, she said, and terminate his employment effective immediately. Daniel's eyes widened. No, wait, Ms. Brooks, this is a misunderstanding. I didn't know who you were. I didn't. Exactly, Ariana said softly. And now you do. Security stepped forward, each officer taking one of Daniel's arms. He struggled. He pleaded. He begged. Please. Ms. Brooks, Ariana. I've worked here 15 years. You can't do this. I didn't know. Ariana held his gaze with a calm that froze him. What you did wasn't a mistake, she said quietly. It was a habit. Those words shattered him more than the firing itself. As the guards dragged him from the room, his voice echoed down the hall. I'm begging you. Please. Please. But the doors closed, cutting off his screams. The boardroom exhaled, long, shaky, terrified. Ariana turned back to the executives. Please sit, she said. They obeyed instantly. She walked to the head of the table, slowly, not arrogantly, but with a natural confidence that made her presence impossible to ignore. When she reached the chair at the head of the table, Daniel's former seat, she paused. She looked at it the way a warrior looks at a battlefield won through quiet strength rather than violence. Then she sat. She pulled out a folder from her bag. Let's begin, she said. We have a company to rebuild. One of the directors spoke in a trembling voice. Ms. Brooks, we are deeply sorry. Had we known. You shouldn't have needed to know, Ariana replied calmly. Respect shouldn't depend on someone's position, or appearance, or title. The room nodded in shame. A junior executive, the youngest in the room, raised his hand hesitantly. Ms. Brooks, why did you buy the company? He asked softly. Ariana closed her folder. She looked around the table at every face, some nervous, some humbled, some still in shock. Then she told them the truth. My mother worked for this company 30 years ago, Ariana began. Not in management. Not in finance. She cleaned these floors. She washed these windows. She emptied trash cans in these same hallways. The room went still. Every day she came home exhausted. And every day she told me the same thing. One day, someone who looks like you will sit in the rooms that people like me never could. A few executives blinked back tears. When I was 10, she brought me inside this building for the first time, Ariana continued. We walked through the lobby. She pointed at the top floor and said, that's where the important people make decisions. She paused. And I promised myself that one day, I would be one of them. Every executive listened without blinking, afraid to miss a single word. When my mother died 3 years ago, Ariana said softly, I decided it was time. So I started buying shares. Quietly. Patiently. Strategically. She looked at the board. And last week, I bought the controlling stake. Silence. Powerful, emotional silence. Ariana took a slow breath. My goal is not revenge. My goal is culture. My goal is change. This company will not be known for arrogance or bullying or discrimination. She glanced toward the door where Daniel had been dragged out. We will be known for respect, for fairness, for professionalism. She folded her hands. And that begins today. The board nodded, humbled. The finance director cleared his throat. What would you like us to do first, Ms. Brooks? Ariana opened her folder again. First, she said, we're instituting mandatory anti-harassment and anti-discrimination training for all employees, including executives. The room nodded in agreement. Second, she said, we're creating a confidential reporting system where employees can safely speak up against bullying. No retaliation. No cover-ups. More nods. Third, she said, we're restructuring leadership. Anyone who shares Daniel's behavior, even slightly, will not be part of this company moving forward. A nervous shiver spread through the room. And then Ariana did something that surprised everyone. She smiled gently. I'm not here to rule with an iron fist, she said. I'm here to raise the standard. One executive raised a trembling hand. If we may ask, Ms. Brooks, what was your impression of us before today? Ariana leaned back in her chair. When I walked past the receptionist earlier this morning, she said. She jumped up and greeted me warmly. She offered to walk me to the boardroom. She treated me with kindness. Do you know why? Because kindness is instinctive. You don't have to prove power to people who live with dignity. She paused. Then I walked into this room. And some of you smiled politely. She looked around. But most of you stared like I didn't belong. No one blinked. Your eyes told me everything, Ariana said softly. Not because I'm a stranger, but because I'm a black woman in a room where you don't often see black women. Some executives lowered their heads. Ariana went on. But I'm not angry. I'm not here to punish. I'm here to build a culture where the next black woman, or anyone who's different, won't walk into a room and be questioned before they speak. Then she closed her folder. That's why I'm here. A long silence followed. But this one wasn't awkward. It was respectful. It was awakening. It was the sound of a company realizing it was entering a new era. After the meeting, as executives filed out of the room quietly, one of them, an older woman who'd been with the company 20 years, approached Ariana. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you. We needed this." Ariana squeezed her hand. "Then let's make sure it lasts." Later that evening, as Ariana walked out of the building, employees watched her with a different kind of awe. Not because she owned the company, but because she had changed something in them. Security opened the door for her. The receptionist smiled wide. And Ariana stepped into the evening air knowing her mother's words had come full circle. The next day, news spread across the industry. A CEO who didn't shout. A leader who didn't humiliate. A woman who didn't need power to prove she had it. But the story that spread the fastest was the one every employee whispered. The woman they tried to throw out owns the entire building. And the moral was clear. You never know who you're talking to. You never know who you're disrespecting. And sometimes the person you try to humiliate is the one holding the future in their hands. Ariana didn't rise to power through revenge. She rose through resilience, through patience, through dignity. And in the end, she taught the company one unforgettable truth. Real power doesn't shout. Real power doesn't bully. Real power doesn't slap back. Real power simply walks into the room, and the entire room changes.